Hi.
Hello again. Back in chapter 9, which is really the beginning of this sequence of events that follow up the prediction of the 70 weeks in chapter 9 to the end. So we have the 70 weeks, which gives us disclosure as to the important date we need to know, namely the coming of Prince Messiah and his cutting off, and what will be the consequence of that cutting off. And chapters 10 through 12 fill out the picture, tell us the history, as it were, of the people of Daniel for the next, well, now it's 2,500 years. But we made the point back in chapter 9 that all of this started because Daniel was meditating upon the prophecy of Jeremiah.
Right.
And he was meditating upon the date then of the end of the exile and the end of the desolations of Jerusalem. And we're told that explicitly, that was the emphasis of his prayer when he starts to pray the prayer that brings Gabriel with the 70 weeks. So the connection with Jeremiah is established. And in the last segment we made the point that you can't really understand Matthew 24 or Luke 21 or Mark 13, all of the last days passages in the Gospels, and you can't understand the book of Revelation without reference to the mother prophecy. And the mother prophecy about the Great Tribulation is not Daniel 12 or Matthew 24, it is Jeremiah. So I wanted to read through this passage in Jeremiah to set up our last discussions of Daniel.
Okay.
Verses 7 to 11 specifically.
Of chapter 30.
Of chapter 30.
Okay. Alas, for the day is a great one, so that there is no other like it, and it is the time of distress for Jacob. But he will be saved even out of it. And it must occur in that day, is the utterance of Jehovah of armies, that I shall break one's yoke from off your neck, and your bands I shall tear in two, and no more will strangers exploit him as a servant. And they will certainly serve Jehovah their God, and David their king, whom I shall raise up for them. And as for you, do not be afraid, O my servant Jacob, is the utterance of Jehovah, and do not be struck with terror, O Israel, for there I am saving you from far off, and your offspring from the land of their captivity. And Jacob will certainly return and be free of disturbance and be at ease, and there will be no one causing trembling. For I am with you, is the utterance of Jehovah, to save you. But I shall make an extermination among all the nations to which I have scattered you. However, in your case I shall make no extermination, and I shall have to correct you to the proper degree, as I shall by no means leave you unpunished.
So can we see the connection with the themes of Matthew and Daniel and several other later prophecies of the Old Testament here?
Yeah.
Starting with this explicit reference to a great day, none like it. Remember Jesus and Daniel's words on that subject. What is this great tribulation about? It is the time of Jacob's distress, but he will be saved from it.
Yeah, it's like the final, the end of the drama as to his punishing them as a nation.
So it's made very clear throughout this passage, and especially right at the end, that he will have to chasten them to the appropriate measure. The New American Standard says, I will chasten you justly, and I will by no means leave you unpunished, but I will not destroy you completely, whereas I will destroy the nations. And we're not told why he's going to destroy the nations. After all, when God called Israel out of Egypt, he didn't destroy Egypt.
Right.
They had acted as hosts. That seems to be part of the reason they have a continuous history. They had been the birthplace of the nation, as it were. But we're told explicitly here that he will destroy the nations. It's only when you get to Daniel, the passage we just read in Daniel 11, and when you look at, let's say, Ezekiel 36 or Zechariah 12 through 14, you realize why God acts in destruction and judgment of the nations? Well, it's because of a final attack coming upon Israel, according to this scenario. Then there's the connection with a breaking of a yoke in verse 8. So this connects very obviously with the famous prophecy, if you're a witness, of Luke 21:24. The appointed times of the nations, that Jerusalem will be trampled by the nations, and his people will be scattered throughout the world until the times of the Gentiles are over. Presumably something's going to change at the end. So here you see that concept, the breaking of the yoke from off their neck.
And them being returning from being scattered.
Returning in verse 10 from their captivity. And we can't say that's the Babylonian captivity. This is all the nations where he's scattered them throughout the entire world. And we know that really didn't happen until the temple was destroyed the second time. And
then it talks about them being in a time of peace, basically, and disturbed. Well, that's not happened.
Yeah. And then the resurrection is brought in, but kind of indirectly, because there's a reference to David, their king, being raised up. So, of course, some want to make this messianic. This is a reference to Jesus being raised in a symbolic sense and also in a literal resurrection. But in the context of Jeremiah, it's about David, their king, being raised. And the resurrection, therefore, is very much at the front of this combination of ideas. So he says, don't be dismayed, O Israel. So, of course, Jeremiah lives at the beginning of the period that we call the times of the Gentiles. It was during his lifetime that the times of the Gentiles began with the Neo-Babylonian Empire, which he himself prophesied would happen back in chapters 25 and 29. So the yoke begins with Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar is the one who lays the yoke upon Israel, or Judah more specifically, and Jerusalem. And the yoke is going to be broken, it says explicitly, one day, because I am with you, verse 11. Declares Yahweh to save you. There's the covenant commitment.
Yeah, so
the name of Yahweh.
It does give you more of a big picture of how all these prophecies continue. There's continuity between them.
So Israel will be punished for its sins. That's very clear from this entire passage. And it will culminate, that period of punishment and chastisement, with this great tribulation. But Israel's the only nation that has a national promise to be delivered. The other nations here, and that's us, we are told that we will be destroyed. And Zechariah and Ezekiel give us the reason, and Daniel, that one day the nations will attack God's people, and that is the time when Messiah will reveal himself to his ancient people. And we're all anticipating that day. So in the next segment we'll talk about the culminating passages and these specific whens, these periods of days that are in Daniel chapter 12, that the Watchtower has done something fancy with.
Right.